I had spent 3 months planning our 10th anniversary celebration. Every detail was meticulously arranged, from booking the exclusive rooftop restaurant that James had been hinting about since Christmas, to coordinating with the chef for his favorite seafood paella. I'd even scheduled the evening so we'd witness the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks behind the downtown skyline. What I couldn't have planned for was how this perfect evening would shatter my world, and then, unexpectedly, set me free. The restaurant was everything I'd hoped for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Soft jazz played in the background as we were led to our private corner table, the city sprawling below us like a carpet of twinkling lights. James looked handsome in his tailored navy suit, the one I'd given him last Christmas. His smile seemed genuine as we clinked glasses, toasting to a decade together. I'd even splurged on a custom engraved watch for him, tucked away in my purse, for the perfect moment. To 10 years, I said, raising my glass of champagne. James took a long sip, then set his glass down with deliberate care. The slight tremor in his hands was my first clue that something was off. "Rebecca," he said, his voice unnervingly steady. "There's something I need to tell you." I smiled encouragingly, still blissfully unaware of what was coming. "I've been seeing someone for the past 2 years," he continued, maintaining uncomfortable eye contact. "Her name is Vanessa. She works in the Denver office." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. The background chatter of the restaurant faded, and I could hear only the thundering of my pulse in my ears. "I'm leaving you," he added, his tone businesslike, as though discussing a merger rather than demolishing our marriage. "Vanessa and I have found a place together. I've already moved most of my important things." I stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate, if cruel, anniversary prank, but his expression remained impassive, his eyes betraying nothing beyond mild discomfort at the conversation. For a brief moment, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions, shock, betrayal, humiliation, threatening to drown me. But instead of collapsing or causing a scene, I did something that would later change the entire trajectory of our divorce. I smiled. I reached for my water glass, took a deliberate sip, and set it down carefully. "Is she good at her job?" I asked, my voice as steady as his had been. James blinked rapidly, clearly thrown by my composure. "What?" "Vanessa," I clarified. "Is she competent at work? I'm curious what attracted you to her initially." His brows furrowed in confusion. This wasn't the response he had expected. The script he'd prepared for, tears, pleading, perhaps even a public scene, was suddenly useless. "She's very good at what she does," he stammered. "She's been leading the Western regional expansion." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's impressive. I'm sure your boss Bradley appreciates having both of you on the same team." The mention of his boss made James shift uncomfortably in his seat. "How do you know Bradley?" I smiled again, taking another sip of my water. "Oh, we've spoken several times. Most recently at the charity gala last month. The one you said you couldn't attend because of your business trip to Seattle." His face paled slightly. "You were at the charity gala?" "I donated to their education fund," I said casually. "Bradley mentioned how disappointing it was that you couldn't make it, especially since the Denver office team was being recognized for their work." Oddly, he didn't mention Vanessa being absent as well. The waiter approached with our appetizers, and I thanked him warmly while James sat in stunned silence. I sampled the tuna tartare, complimenting the chef's presentation. "Would you like to try some?" I offered James. "It's excellent." He shook his head, clearly struggling to regain his footing in a conversation that had veered wildly off his planned course. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, his voice slightly hoarse. Dabbed my lips with my napkin. "About Vanessa specifically? About 6 months. About you cheating in general?" Almost a year. His face registered genuine shock. You've known for a year and never said anything? I shrugged slightly. I needed time to think, to plan. And honestly, I wanted to be absolutely certain before making any decisions. I reached for my purse, but instead of pulling out the anniversary gift I'd planned to give him, I extracted a small manila envelope and placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, not reaching for it. "Just some photographs, hotel receipts, credit card statements. Copies, of course. My lawyer has the originals." James's face went from pale to ashen. "You hired a lawyer?" "Actually, I hired an investigator." "First," I corrected him. "Maya is excellent at her job, very thorough. The lawyer came later, once I had enough documentation." The main courses arrived, and I smiled at the waiter again, thanking him for the beautiful presentation. James stared at his untouched plate. The seafood paella he'd once claimed was his favorite meal now seemingly unappetizing. "I don't understand," he said finally. "If you've known all this time, why go through with this dinner? Why plan this whole evening?" I took a bite of my salmon, savoring it before answering. "Because I wanted to see your face when you realized you weren't in control of this narrative anymore." As if on cue, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it reflexively, then froze. "You might want to check that," I suggested mildly. "It seems important." With visible reluctance, he looked at his phone screen, his complexion growing even paler. "Why is Bradley texting me about an ethics investigation?" he whispered. I took another bite of my dinner, chewing thoughtfully. "Probably because dating. Your direct report while overseeing her promotion and salary increases presents quite a significant conflict of interest, especially when company policy explicitly forbids such relationships without disclosure to HR." James looked up at me, genuine fear now visible in his eyes. "What did you do?" "Me? Nothing yet. But it seems Maya's investigation uncovered some interesting patterns in the approval of Vanessa's expense reports and bonuses. Bradley asked me some questions when we spoke at the gala, and I suggested he might want to look into certain discrepancies." James loosened his tie, suddenly looking constricted. "Rebecca, we need to discuss this privately. This is getting out of hand." "Is it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You were perfectly comfortable announcing the end of our marriage in public. Why the sudden need for privacy?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This could ruin my career." "That would be unfortunate," I agreed, taking a sip of my wine. "Almost as unfortunate as throwing away 10 years of marriage for an affair that violated not just our vows but also your professional ethics." The dessert menu arrived, and I browsed it with interest while James sat in stunned silence, his career and carefully constructed exit strategy crumbling before his eyes. "I think I'll try the chocolate soufflé," I told the waiter. "James won't be having dessert." As the waiter walked away, I turned back to my husband, whose face had transitioned from shock to dawning comprehension of just how thoroughly he had miscalculated. "To answer your earlier question," I said softly, "I planned this dinner because I wanted to reclaim our anniversary. After tonight, it won't be the day my husband left me for another woman. It will be the day I took back control of my life." James stared at me, his jaw clenched in that familiar way I'd seen countless times during our marriage, usually when a business deal was falling apart. He'd always been so in control, so certain of his path forward. Seeing him scramble to regain his footing brought an unexpected sense of satisfaction. "Rebecca, be reasonable," he said, lowering his voice. "We can discuss the financial arrangements privately. There's no need to bring my work into this." I tilted my head slightly. "I'm being perfectly reasonable, James. In fact, I've been reasonable. For months. Ever since I found the receipt for that weekend getaway to Aspen that you claimed was a corporate retreat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." His eyes widened slightly. "That was Nearly 11 months ago, I finished for him. Valentine's weekend, to be precise. Quite thoughtful of you to book the couple's massage package. I'm sure Vanessa appreciated the hot stone treatment. I took a deliberate sip of wine, remembering the moment I'd discovered that first piece of evidence. It had been an accident, a credit card statement left open on his laptop while he showered. The $200 spa package at the St. Regis Aspen had caught my eye immediately. James had been in Aspen that weekend, but he'd never mentioned any luxury. Spa treatments. "How did you get those receipts?" he asked quietly. "You've always been so careful with your passwords, but you forgot one thing," I replied, enjoying how he leaned forward anxiously. "You use the same passwords for everything." Once I had access to your email, the rest was surprisingly easy to piece together. The waiter returned with my souffle, and I thanked him warmly. James waited until he was out of earshot before continuing. "Vanessa has nothing to do with this," he insisted. "Leave her out of it." I couldn't help but laugh. "Vanessa has everything to do with this. She's the 24-year-old aspiring model you've been sleeping with for 2 years. The same woman you've been introducing as your marketing consultant to clients, charging her flights and hotel rooms to the company account." His face reddened. "How do you know her age?" "Instagram is quite informative," I replied casually. "She documented her birthday celebration quite thoroughly last month. The rooftop bar, the designer dress, the diamond bracelet, which, by the way, matches the charge on our joint credit card that you claimed was a gift for your mother." I pulled out my phone and turned it toward him, showing the social media post where Vanessa posed with a champagne glass, the caption reading, "24 and ready for more. Thanks for making my birthday magical. Abroje. Ast blessed Asher living my best life." The color drained from James's face. "She set her account to private." "She did eventually," I acknowledged, "but not before Maya documented everything. Vanessa is quite prolific with her hashtags. It made tracking your relationship timeline remarkably straightforward." James pushed his untouched plate away. "Rebecca, what do you want? Just tell me what you want to make this go away." I savored a bite of the souffle before answering. "That's the wrong question, James. The right question is, what have I already done?" His fingers drummed nervously on the table, a habit I'd noticed over the years whenever he felt cornered. It was strange how intimate knowledge of someone's mannerisms remained even after their betrayal. "I spoke with Sierra last week," I said, referencing his company's head of HR. "We've known each other since your company holiday parties. She was quite interested in the pattern of promotions and bonuses Vanessa has received under your supervision." James's drumming fingers froze. "You had no right. Actually, their ethics policy encourages reporting conflicts of interest, especially when company funds are being misappropriated to finance an affair." I paused, letting the implications sink in. The trip to Paris for market research was particularly egregious. The Four Seasons isn't typically approved for staff. At Vanessa's level, is it? He loosened his tie further, his confidence visibly crumbling. "This is vindictive, Rebecca. This isn't like you." "No, what isn't like me is accepting betrayal silently," I replied, my voice finally showing a trace of the anger I'd managed all evening. "What isn't like me is watching you systematically dismantle our marriage for a woman half my age without consequences." I returned to my dessert, giving him a moment to absorb the reality of his situation. The souffle was exquisite, rich and decadent, much like the satisfaction of watching James's carefully constructed exit strategy fall apart. "By the way," I continued, "Sierra mentioned that ethics investigations typically result in suspension pending review. You might want to check your work email." As if on command, James's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and visibly flinched. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked, his voice hollow. I considered the question. "About as long as you've been planning to leave me, I suppose. The difference is I did my homework. The truth was, I hadn't planned any of this initially." When I first found evidence of his affair, I'd been devastated, crying for days, barely able to function. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Determination. You know what the irony is? I said, placing my fork down. I actually convinced myself it was a misunderstanding at first. I made excuses for you. Late meetings, business trips, networking events. I wanted so badly to believe you wouldn't do this to us. James at least had the decency to look ashamed for a moment. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I raised an eyebrow. Affairs don't just happen, James. They're a series of deliberate choices. Each lie, each hotel booking, each secret text. Those were all choices you made repeatedly for 2 years. Looking at him now, I wondered what I had ever seen in him. The confident, ambitious man I'd married had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone willing to throw away a decade of marriage for a relationship built on lies and corporate expense accounts. Does she know you're being investigated? I asked, genuinely curious. His silence was answer enough. I thought not, I continued. I wonder how committed she'll remain when the company car and expense account disappear. When the gifts and luxury weekends are replaced with unemployment and legal bills. James's phone buzzed a third time. He checked it and closed his eyes briefly, as if physically pained by the message. Sierra has requested a meeting tomorrow morning at 9, he said quietly, with the ethics committee and legal counsel present. I nodded, fighting to keep the satisfaction from showing too plainly on my face. You should probably prepare for that. I hear they're quite thorough. The waiter approached with the check, and I reached for it before James could react. I've got this, I said, sliding my credit card into the leather folder. Consider it my final gift to you. The ride home was silent, thick with tension. James stared out the passenger window, his reflection in the glass showing a man whose world was collapsing. I drove carefully, my hands steady on the wheel despite the emotional hurricane inside me. The city lights blurred past us, the same streets we'd traveled together countless times, now feeling completely foreign. I pulled into our driveway, the home we'd bought together 6 years ago, a colonial-style house with the wraparound porch I'd always dreamed of. As I turned off the engine, James finally broke the silence. I need to get some things, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. Of course, I replied calmly, though I'm curious what's left, since you've already moved your important things. Inside, the house felt different, emptier somehow, though nothing obvious was missing. James headed straight upstairs while I kicked off my heels and settled. On the living room sofa, listening to his movements above me, the sound of drawers opening and closing, his footsteps across the hardwood floors. Sounds that had once been comforting now felt like intrusions. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. All set for tomorrow. Let me know when you're ready. Smiled slightly, typing back a quick confirmation. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. James came downstairs carrying a duffel bag, pausing awkwardly in the doorway. I'll come back for the rest when you're at work. That won't be necessary, I said, looking up at him. I've taken time off. I'll be here whenever you'd like to collect your belongings. Just give me advance notice. He frowned, clearly unhappy, about losing the opportunity to return to an empty house. Fine, I'll text you. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Before you go, I think we should finish our conversation. There are some things you should know. Rebecca, it's late, and I'm not in the mood for— I'm not asking, I interrupted, my tone making it clear this wasn't optional. Sit down, James. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar command in my voice, or simply the realization that he was no longer in control of the situation, but he complied, setting his bag down and taking a seat in the armchair across from me. I want to make sure you understand what happens next, I began, feeling an unexpected calm. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with the ethics committee. They've been provided with documentation of 17 separate instances where company funds were used to finance your relationship with Vanessa. His face paled. 17? Yes. The Aspen trip. Paris. The team dinner in Chicago, where the only team member present was Vanessa. The conference in Miami, where she wasn't even registered as an attendee. Shall I continue? He shook his head numbly. The company will likely terminate you for cause, I continued, which means no severance, no continued health benefits, and possible legal action to recover misappropriated funds. Vanessa will either be terminated as well or will resign to avoid the scandal. Either way, your professional reputation will be significantly damaged. James leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. This is destroying both our lives, Rebecca. Is that really what you want? No, I replied honestly. What I wanted was a faithful husband who honored his vows. What I wanted was the life we planned together. What I wanted was not to discover that my husband was sleeping with an Instagram model young enough to be his daughter, while I was busy supporting his career and building our home. I reached for the folder I'd left on the coffee table and withdrew, several documents sliding them across to him. What are these? He asked, not touching them. Options, I said simply. Option 1 is the scenario I just described. Termination, potential legal charges, and a very public scandal. Your parents, friends, and colleagues will all know exactly why our marriage ended. Vanessa's modeling aspirations will be tainted by her association with a married executive who was fired for ethical violations. James picked up the first document, scanning it quickly. And this is Option 2. A resignation letter citing personal reasons. Still no severance, but no public ethics investigation either. You admit to the affair and financial improprieties to Sierra privately, repay the company, and quietly exit. Why would they agree to this? He asked suspiciously. Because I suggested it would be in everyone's best interest to avoid a public scandal. The company doesn't want the negative publicity any more than you do. He placed the first document down and picked up the second one, his eyes widening as he read. This divorce settlement is completely one-sided. Is it? I asked innocently. I thought it was rather generous considering the circumstances. You keep your retirement accounts and personal savings. I keep the house, my retirement, and receive alimony for 5 years, half the length of our marriage. That seems quite reasonable to me. This would leave me with almost nothing, he protested. Not nothing, I corrected him. Just significantly less than you expected. But consider the alternative: legal fees, potential civil actions from your company, and unemployment with a tarnished reputation. Option 2 looks quite favorable by comparison. James ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. And if I refuse both options? I withdrew a third document from the folder. Then we proceed with Option 3. A contested divorce where all evidence of your affair and financial misconduct becomes part of the public record. Your parents will receive copies of the hotel receipts showing you were with Vanessa during your mother's birthday celebration, the one you claimed you couldn't attend due to urgent business. Your firm's competitors will learn how you've been misusing company funds, and Vanessa's aspiring modeling career will be permanently linked to a married man's downfall. The color drained from his face as I laid out each consequence with clinical precision. You've thought of everything, he said quietly, a mixture of anger and reluctant admiration in his voice. I had time, I replied simply. 2 years of your deception gave me plenty of opportunity to prepare. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his bag. I need time to think. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow, I said calmly. Sierra expects your decision before the ethics committee meeting. James paused at the door, turning back to look at me. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I had married. Thoughtful, calculating, but now with an edge of desperation. When did you become this person? He asked softly. I met his gaze steadily. When you forced me to. After James left, The house fell into a profound silence that seemed to amplify rather than soothe my tumultuous emotions. I moved through our home, no, my home now, with a strange sense of detachment, running my fingers along the familiar surfaces, examining photographs that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. In our bedroom, I noticed the empty spaces where James's things had been. The half-vacant closet, the empty drawer in the nightstand, the bare spot on the bathroom counter where his electric razor had stood. He'd been methodically removing himself from our shared life for weeks, and I hadn't even noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to notice. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself a moment of genuine emotion. Tears came, but they weren't the desperate, broken sobs I might have expected. Instead, they were quiet, controlled, almost contemplative. I wasn't crying for the loss of James. I was mourning the death of a future I had believed in, planned for, and invested in completely. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Eliza. "How did it go? Are you okay?" Eliza had been my rock throughout this ordeal, the only person I'd confided in completely. When I'd first discovered James's betrayal, she'd been the one to help me see clearly through the fog of pain and confusion. It was Eliza who had connected me with Maya, a college friend who'd become a private investigator. "He's gone," I texted back. "Everything is in motion." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by her reply. "Do you want me to come over?" I considered it briefly, then declined. "Not tonight. I need some time alone. Breakfast tomorrow?" "I'll bring the mimosas," she promised. Placing my phone on the nightstand, I finally changed out of my anniversary dress, an expensive black number I'd purchased specially for the occasion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect evening, from my outfit to the restaurant, all to commemorate a marriage that had been hollowed out from within. In the shower, I let the hot water wash over me, imagining it carrying away the last remnants of my old life. By the time I emerged, wrapped in my robe with my hair in a towel, I felt strangely energized. There was work to be done. At my desk in the home office, I opened my laptop and began methodically checking that everything was in place for the next day. I reviewed the emails I'd exchanged with Sierra from HR, confirming our understanding. I double-checked the documentation Maya had compiled, ensuring it was comprehensive and irrefutable. I examined the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared, making sure every detail was accurate. A text arrived from Maya. "Surveillance in place. Will alert you to any developments." I smiled slightly, grateful for her thoroughness. Maya had positioned someone to monitor the apartment James now shared with Vanessa. If he returned there tonight, which seemed likely, we would know his next moves. As I was about to close my laptop, an email notification appeared from Vanessa Collins. My heart rate quickened as I clicked to open it. "Rebecca," it began without greeting or preamble. "James just told me what you're doing. This is between you and him. Leave me out of it. I never meant to hurt anyone." I read the message twice, noting the defensive tone, the attempt to distance herself from responsibility. It was exactly what I had expected. I took a screenshot for my records but didn't respond immediately. Vanessa's reaction was another piece falling into place. Just after midnight, Maya's update came through. "Subject returned to the apartment at 11:42 p.m., appeared agitated. Has made multiple phone calls since arriving." I could imagine James pacing the floor of their apartment, frantically trying to find a way out of the trap he'd set for himself. Would he call his boss directly, his lawyer? Or was he trying to convince Vanessa that everything would be fine? At 1:17 a.m., Maya sent another text. "Subject left apartment alone at 1:05, heading east on Harrison Street. Will update location." Frowned, wondering where James would go at this hour. 20 minutes later, I had my answer. Subject at Lynch and Associates Law Offices. Emergency consultation with Stan Lynch. Stan Lynch was one of the city's most prominent divorce attorneys, known for his aggressive tactics and high fees. It seemed James was exploring his options, looking for any legal leverage to counter my carefully constructed plan. I wasn't worried. My own attorney, Diane Peters, had anticipated this move. We had built our strategy knowing that James would seek legal counsel, possibly from someone like Lynch. The evidence was too solid, the consequences too severe for even the best lawyer to easily dismiss. At 3:24 a.m., another update. Subject returned to apartment. Meeting lasted approximately 90 minutes. I tried to imagine what advice Stan Lynch had given James in the middle of the night. Had he offered false hope? Or had he confirmed what James already knew, that his position was untenable? I finally went to bed around 4 a.m., physically exhausted but mentally alert. Sleep came in fits and starts, my mind refusing to fully shut down. When my alarm sounded at 6:30, I felt as though I'd barely closed my eyes. Still, I rose with purpose, following the morning routine I'd established in the months since discovering James's betrayal. A 5-mile run to clear my head, followed by a cold shower and a carefully selected outfit, a charcoal gray pantsuit that projected confidence and control. As I applied my makeup, I studied my reflection, noticing subtle changes in my face. There was a hardness around my eyes that hadn't been there before, a set to my jaw that spoke of determination rather than happiness. I looked like a woman who had been tested and found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. At 7:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before Sierra's deadline, my phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering, keeping my voice neutral. Yes? I've thought about our conversation, he said, his tone clipped and formal. I'll take option 2. I allowed myself a small smile. I thought you might. Sierra will be expecting your resignation letter by email before your meeting. The divorce papers require your signature in person. I know, he replied curtly. I'll drop by the house this afternoon to sign them. I'll be here until 4, I said. After that, you'll need to coordinate with Diane's office. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice lower. Rebecca, I'm sorry it came to this. The familiar anger flared within me, hot and immediate. No, James. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I ended the call before he could respond, unwilling to listen to apologies that came only after his options had been exhausted. At precisely 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Sierra to both James and me. James, I've received your resignation letter. Our meeting at 9 a.m. will proceed as discussed to finalize the details of your departure and restitution agreement. Rebecca, thank you for your discretion in this matter. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. James would leave his company disgraced but without public scandal. Next would come the divorce settlement, giving me the financial security I deserved after 10 years of supporting his career and tolerating his betrayal. As I picked up my keys to meet Eliza for our promised breakfast, my phone chimed with a text from Maya. Vanessa left the apartment alone at 7:50 a.m., carrying 2 suitcases. I paused, reading the message twice. This was unexpected. Vanessa leaving with luggage just as James had agreed to my terms. Was she abandoning him now that his career was imploding? Or had James asked her to leave temporarily while he sorted out the mess? Either way, it was another crack in the facade of their relationship, another consequence of the choices they had made. Keep me posted, I texted back to Maya, then headed out to meet my sister, feeling lighter than I had in months. The cafe where I met Eliza was our longtime favorite, a small sunlit place with mismatched chairs and the best croissants in the city. I spotted her immediately, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, sunglasses perched on top of her head. She stood and embraced me tightly as I approached. "You look surprisingly good for someone whose marriage just imploded," she said, studying my face as we sat down. "That's because it imploded months ago," I replied, accepting the mimosa she'd already ordered for me. Last night was just the formal acknowledgement. A server approached, and we ordered avocado toast for Eliza, eggs Benedict for me. When we were alone again, Eliza leaned forward, her expression serious. "So he took option 2? I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. The combination of champagne and orange juice felt celebratory, appropriate for the occasion. Just as we predicted, James has always been practical about self-preservation. "And Vanessa?" Eliza asked, raising an eyebrow. "Left the apartment this morning with suitcases. Maya's tracking her movements." Eliza smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Rats and sinking ships." "Something like that," I agreed. "Though I'm curious where she's going. It seems premature to abandon James completely." Our food arrived, momentarily pausing our conversation. As we began eating, I noticed Eliza watching me carefully. "What?" I asked, recognizing her concerned expression. "I'm just checking if you're really okay," she said. "You've been so focused on the plan that I'm worried about what happens when it's all over, when the adrenaline wears off." I considered her question seriously. Was I okay? The betrayal still hurt, of course. 10 years of marriage didn't disappear overnight. But the pain had transformed into something else, a cold, clear purpose that had carried me through the past months. "I think I will be," I said. "Finally. Not today or tomorrow, but eventually." This was never about revenge, Eliza. It was about taking back control. She nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. "Well, I'm here whenever you need me, day or night." My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Maya. Vanessa checked into the Drake Hotel, paid with her own credit card. I frowned, showing the message to Eliza. "The Drake is expensive," she commented. "I thought James controlled the purse strings in their relationship." "Does," I confirmed, thinking through the implications. "At least he paid for all their trips and most of their expenses together." "Maybe she has savings?" I shook my head. Maya's background check showed significant debt, student loans, credit cards. Vanessa was barely making ends meet before James. Eliza's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Unless she has another source of income, or another benefactor," the key possibility hit me like a physical blow. Could Vanessa have been seeing someone else while involved with James? The irony would be almost too perfect. "I need to talk to Maya," I said, already typing a message asking her to investigate this new angle. Eliza watched me with a mixture of concern and admiration. 10 years ago, you would have been devastated by James's betrayal. Probably. Would have blamed yourself even." I looked up from my phone. 10 years ago, I was a different person." "That's my point," she said softly. "In a strange way, James's betrayal forced you to become stronger, more self-reliant. I've never seen you this formidable." I considered her words. There was truth in them. The discovery of James's affair had initially broken me, but in rebuilding myself, I had discovered resources I never knew I possessed: intelligence, strategic thinking, and a steely resolve that surprised even me. "Speaking of formidable," Eliza continued, "what's your next move with James? The papers are ready to sign, but knowing him, he'll try to negotiate at the last minute." "Let him try," I said, finishing my mimosa. "The terms are non-negotiable." After breakfast, I returned home to prepare for James's visit. I had arranged the living room carefully, the coffee table cleared except for the divorce papers, 2 pens laid out precisely, and a digital recorder placed conspicuously to document our conversation. Everything designed to communicate that this was a business transaction, nothing more. At 1:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find James standing there, looking significantly worse than when he'd left the night before. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled. his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Come in," I said simply, stepping aside. He entered, his gaze immediately taking in the arranged living room. "Very official," he commented dryly. "This is a legal proceeding," I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Would you like something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "No," he said, sitting down heavily on the sofa. "Let's just get this over with." I sat across from him, my posture deliberately straight, hands folded in my lap. "How did your meeting with Sierra go?" He grimaced. "Exactly as you predicted. I'm officially unemployed, with a repayment agreement for the misappropriated funds." "And Vanessa?" I asked, watching his face carefully. Something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps or anger. "She's taking some time to think." "At the Drake Hotel," I supplied, enjoying his startled expression. "With her luggage." "How did you—" he began, then shook his head in resignation. "Never mind. Yes, she's at the Drake. She thought it would be better to give me space while I deal with this situation." "How considerate of her," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm, especially considering she's partly responsible for the situation. James leaned forward, running his hands through his hair. "Look, Rebecca, I know you're angry." "This isn't about anger," I interrupted. "This is about consequences. You made choices, James. So did Vanessa. Now you both have to live with the results." He looked up at me, his expression suddenly calculating. "The terms in these papers, they're punitive, and you know it. No judge would award you this much in a contested divorce." I smiled slightly. "Perhaps not. But contesting the divorce would mean a public hearing, evidence entered into the record, witnesses called, including Sierra from HR, Bradley from your former company, and of course, Vanessa herself. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" His jaw tightened. "You're blackmailing me." "I prefer to think of it as offering you a choice between bad and worse outcomes," I replied calmly. "A choice you gave me when you decided to have an affair, with a woman half my age while I supported your career and maintained our home." We sat in tense silence for several moments, the weight of 10 years and countless betrayals hanging between us. Finally, James reached for one of the pens. "You've won, Rebecca. Is that what you want to hear?" "No," I said honestly. "What I wanted was a husband who honored his vows. What I wanted was the life we planned together. Since that's no longer possible, I'll settle for a fair resolution that acknowledges the decade I invested in this marriage." He signed the papers without further comment, his signature sharp and angry across the designated lines. When he finished, he stood abruptly. "Anything else?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. I rose as well, gathering the signed documents. "No. My lawyer will file these tomorrow. You'll receive copies for your records." As he turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it, then couldn't help the small sound of surprise that escaped me. James paused at the door. "What is it?" I debated whether to share the information, then decided the impact would be worth it. "Maya just sent me something interesting. Apparently, Vanessa has been meeting regularly with Calvin Richards, the CEO of your company's main competitor." The color drained from James's face. "That's not possible. She wouldn't what?" "James?" I asked innocently. "Wouldn't betray your trust? Wouldn't lie to you? Wouldn't use you for her own advantage? That does sound inconceivable." James stood frozen in the doorway, the implications of what I'd just told him visibly washing over him in waves. His face cycled through emotions, disbelief, anger, betrayal, with such transparency that I might have felt sorry for him under different circumstances. "You're lying," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. I shrugged, picking up my phone. "Would you like to see the photos? Maya is very thorough." He hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to know the truth and fearing confirmation of yet another betrayal. Finally, he stepped back into the living room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Show me." I pulled up the images Maya had sent. Vanessa entering an upscale restaurant, Vanessa and Calvin Richards seated at a corner table, their heads close together. Calvin handing Vanessa what appeared to be a small flash drive. The timestamps showed these meetings had occurred regularly over the past 3 months. James stared at the photos, his expression hardening with each swipe of my finger across the screen. When he looked up, the man I'd once loved was completely gone, replaced by someone hollow and diminished. "She told me she was meeting with modeling agencies," he said, his voice barely audible. "She said Calvin's wife was in the fashion industry and was helping her make connections." "That may be true," I replied, though I doubted it. "Or she may have been passing company information to your biggest competitor. Either way, it seems your relationship with Vanessa wasn't as exclusive as you thought." James sank back onto the sofa, looking suddenly much older than his 47 years. "How long have you known about this? The Calvin connection?" "Only since this morning," I admitted. Maya noticed Vanessa's sudden financial independence and investigated. "The rest? Well, you know how long I've been tracking your affair." He nodded absently, staring at the floor. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage, and now Vanessa too." For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the compassion I'd once had for him. This man I had loved, supported, and built a life with. But I quickly remembered the months of lies, the carefully orchestrated deception, the way he'd planned to discard me at a dinner I had lovingly arranged to celebrate our marriage. "You haven't lost everything, James," I said, my voice cool but not cruel. "You've still got your health, your education, your skills. You'll find another job eventually, though perhaps not at the level you're accustomed to. You'll rebuild," he looked up, his eyes searching mine. "How can you be so calm about all this? About the end of our marriage?" I considered his question carefully. "Because our marriage ended the moment you decided to betray me with Vanessa. Everything since then has just been paperwork and consequences." My phone rang. Eliza's ringtone. "I need to take this," I said, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. "You won't believe what I found," Eliza said without preamble. "Vanessa has been shopping a tell-all memoir to publishers. Boardroom and bedroom, my life with a married executive. 3 publishers have expressed interest." I closed my eyes, processing this new information. "How did you find this out? Remember my friend Layla who works in publishing? She heard rumors about an explosive corporate memoir and did some digging for me. Does she have proof? Anything concrete?" "A draft proposal that Vanessa's agent has been circulating. It's anonymous at this stage, but the details match perfectly. It mentions a married executive at James's company, the affair timeline, even specific trips they took together." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "That explains the meetings with Calvin. She's been gathering material for her book, corporate insights, relationship details, anything that would make her story more marketable." "Exactly," Eliza confirmed. "The proposal promises insider information on corporate dealings and the ruthless world of executive politics. She's not just selling their affair. She's selling his business knowledge." "James is still here," I said quietly. "I just showed him the photos of Vanessa with Calvin." "Oh," Eliza paused. "How did he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect," I replied. "I need to go. I'll call you later." I returned to the living room to find James standing by the mantel, staring at our wedding photo. The irony wasn't lost on me. The smiling couple in that frame no longer existed. "That was Eliza," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "She has information that Vanessa has been shopping a memoir about her affair with a married executive. The proposal promises corporate insider information." James's head snapped up, his expression shifting from dejection to alarm. A memoir? About us? About you, primarily, I clarified. You were the one with the high-profile position and access to valuable corporate information. Vanessa was just the vehicle to obtain and monetize it. She can't do that, he said, panic edging into his voice. There are confidentiality agreements, NDAs, which you've already violated by sharing privileged information with her, I pointed out. The repayment agreement you signed today likely included confidentiality provisions, which would be further compromised by this book. James pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he tried to call someone. Vanessa, I presumed. The call went straight to voicemail. She's not answering, he muttered, trying again with the same result. Perhaps she's busy with her publisher, I suggested, unable to resist the dig. Or with Calvin. He might be providing additional material for her book. James slammed his phone down on the mantel, narrowly missing our wedding photo. This can't be happening. It's a nightmare. No, I corrected him gently. It's reality. Your reality. He turned to face me, desperation evident in every line of his face. Rebecca, you have to help me stop this. If that book comes out, I'll be unemployable. No company will touch me. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by his request. Help you? After everything you've done? Please, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You're the only one who can. You've proven how resourceful you are. If anyone can stop Vanessa, it's you. The irony of his request was almost too perfect. The man who had betrayed me, planned to leave me, now begging for my assistance. In that moment, I realized I had achieved something I hadn't consciously sought. Complete power over the situation. Over James, even over Vanessa. Why would I help you? I asked, curious about what leverage he thought he had. Because you're better than this, he said softly. Better than revenge. The Rebecca I married wouldn't want to see anyone destroyed, even me. I studied him thoughtfully. The Rebecca you married trusted you completely. She's gone, James. You destroyed her the day you began your affair with Vanessa. He winced, acknowledging the truth of my words. Then do it to protect yourself. If Vanessa publishes that book, you'll be collateral damage. Everyone will know about our failed marriage, her age, the affair. It will affect you too. It was a manipulative approach, but not entirely without merit. A public scandal would touch my life as well, though not nearly as devastatingly as it would impact James. I'll consider it, I said finally. Not for your sake, but because containing Vanessa might be in my best interest as well. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Rebecca. Don't thank me yet, I interrupted. I said I'd consider it. And if I do decide to intervene, it will be on my terms, not yours. He nodded quickly. Of course. Whatever you think is best. I glanced at my watch pointedly. I have appointments this afternoon. We're done here. James gathered himself, picking up his phone from the mantel. At the door, he paused one last time. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for everything. I met his gaze steadily. Noted, but it doesn't change anything. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. Better even, with the unexpected revelation about Vanessa's memoir. James was now completely unmoored, his professional and personal lives in shambles, turning to the very person he had betrayed for salvation. The question now was, what would I do with this final piece of leverage? I had achieved my primary objectives, a favorable divorce settlement, and the satisfaction of seeing James face the consequences of his actions. Did I still need to pursue Vanessa? Or was it time to walk away and focus on rebuilding my own life? Picked up my phone and called Maya. I need everything you can find on Vanessa's book proposal. and I want to know who her literary agent is. Whether I decided to help James or not, information was power, and I wasn't ready to surrender that power just yet. The following morning, I woke with newfound clarity. The confrontation with James had shifted something fundamental inside me. The last lingering attachment to our shared past had finally broken free. I felt lighter, more focused, as though I'd shed a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. Over coffee, I reviewed Maya's overnight findings about Vanessa's literary ambitions. The report was comprehensive, as I'd come to expect from her. Vanessa had signed with Lydia Warren, a relatively new literary agent known for representing sensational memoirs and exposés. According to Maya's source at the agency, the proposal had generated significant interest from publishers, with potential offers ranging from $150,000 to $300,000, substantial for a first-time author. More interestingly, Vanessa had been recording conversations with James for months, creating an audio archive to support her manuscript. Maya had obtained a sample clip from her source, James clearly discussing confidential company information with Vanessa, describing an upcoming merger that hadn't yet been announced to shareholders. I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. Vanessa had been playing a much longer and more sophisticated game than either James or I had given her credit for. The aspiring model facade had concealed a calculating opportunist who had recognized James's vulnerabilities and exploited them methodically. In some strange way, I found myself reluctantly impressed. Vanessa had weaponized her youth and beauty to secure access to valuable information, which she was now preparing to monetize through multiple channels: Calvin Richards, her memoir, perhaps others we hadn't yet discovered. While James had been fantasizing about a new life with a younger woman, Vanessa had been meticulously documenting their relationship for her own financial gain. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Have you thought more about Vanessa? I'm desperate." I set my phone down without responding. James's desperation was not my emergency. Besides, I needed more information before deciding my next move. At 10 a.m., I met Maya at a quiet cafe downtown, away from our usual haunts. She arrived, precisely on time, dressed in her characteristic understated professional attire, a slim leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "I've confirmed the memoir details," she said after ordering an espresso. "Vanessa has already received a preliminary offer from Horizon Publishing. They're especially interested in the corporate espionage angle." "Corporate espionage?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Maya nodded. "That's how she's framing it. According to her proposal, she deliberately targeted James after learning about his company's market position. The affair was a means to an end, accessing proprietary information she could sell to competitors. I absorbed this information slowly. So she's openly admitting to corporate espionage in a book proposal? That seems legally problematic. "It is," Maya confirmed. "But she's positioning it as a whistleblower narrative, exposing corporate corruption through her relationship with James. Her agent believes the legal risks are outweighed by the commercial potential." "And the recordings?" Maya opened her portfolio and slid a USB drive across the table. 17 audio files, ranging from 3 to 45 minutes. James discussing confidential mergers, personnel decisions, financial projections, all pillow. "Talk with Vanessa." I pocketed the drive, my mind working through the implications. "Has James been notified about the book by Vanessa or her agent?" "Not officially," Maya replied. "But Vanessa sent him a text yesterday evening saying they needed to talk about her new project. He hasn't responded." I checked my watch. "He's probably still trying to process everything. Yesterday was eventful for him." Maya studied me with her characteristically perceptive gaze. "Have you decided what you're going to do about Vanessa's book?" "Not yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to let it happen. Let James face the full consequences of his choices. But another part Wants to maintain control of the narrative, Maya finished for me. I nodded. Exactly. If that book is published, it affects me too. Our marriage becomes public fodder. I become the pitiful wife who couldn't satisfy her husband. There's a third option, Maya suggested carefully. One that doesn't help James but protects your interests. I leaned forward. I'm listening. Vanessa's admitting to corporate espionage in her proposal. That's potentially criminal activity. If her publisher understood the full legal ramifications, they might reconsider the project. I considered this approach. So instead of trying to stop Vanessa directly, we make the book too legally toxic for any publisher to touch. Precisely, Maya confirmed. No publisher wants to face accessory charges for profiting from documented corporate espionage. It was elegant in its simplicity, addressing my concerns without rescuing James from the mess he'd created. I could prevent the public airing of my marriage's collapse without actively helping the man who had betrayed me. I need to think about it, I said finally. This feels like the last move in a game I never wanted to play. After parting with Maya, I walked through the city park, allowing the gentle spring air to clear my head. Children played on swings. Couples strolled hand in hand, elderly men hunched over chess tables. Normal lives unfolding around me while mine had been upended so completely. My phone rang. James again. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Rebecca, he began, his voice tense. Vanessa just told me about the book. It's worse than we thought. She has recordings, emails, everything. I know, I replied calmly. Maya obtained samples. He exhaled, sharply. Then you understand how serious this is. If those recordings become public, I could face criminal charges, not just professional disgrace. You should have considered that before discussing confidential information with your mistress, I pointed out. I know, he said, frustration evident in his voice. But this isn't just about me anymore. If Vanessa publishes those recordings, the company could face shareholder lawsuits, regulatory investigations. People could lose their jobs. People who had nothing to do with my mistakes. It was a good point. Perhaps the first genuinely unselfish concern James had expressed throughout this ordeal. Innocent colleagues might indeed be affected by the ripple effects of a corporate scandal. What did Vanessa say when you confronted her about the book? I asked. She wasn't even apologetic, James said bitterly. She said it was just business, that I should have known better than to trust her. She offered to remove some identifying details about me in exchange for a payment of $500,000. I nearly laughed at the audacity. She's blackmailing you now? Essentially, yes. But I don't have that kind of money, especially after the divorce settlement and repaying the company. Rebecca, please, if not for me, then for the innocent people at the company, help me stop her. I found myself at a crossroads. The calculating part of me, the part that had emerged during these difficult months, recognized that I held all the leverage now. I could walk away, leaving James to face Vanessa's betrayal alone. I could help him, extracting further concessions in return. Or I could choose Maya's third option, protecting myself while allowing James to face at least some consequences. I'll meet with you and discuss options, I said finally. But I'm not doing this for you, James. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do for everyone else involved. His relief was palpable, even through the phone. Thank you, Rebecca. You don't know what this means. Don't thank me yet, I cautioned. I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do, and whatever I decide, it will be on my terms. As I ended the call, I realized I had reached a turning point in my own journey through this betrayal. For months, my actions had been motivated by a need for justice, for consequences proportional to James's betrayal. Now, I found myself considering broader implications, moral questions beyond my personal pain. Perhaps this was the final stage of healing, moving beyond revenge to something approaching wisdom. Whatever I decided about Vanessa's book, I would make that decision as the woman I had become, not the woman James had betrayed. The lobby of the Drake Hotel exuded quiet luxury, marble floors, elegant furnishings, and discreet staff who excelled at not noticing anything unusual. I sat in a plush armchair, outwardly composed despite the flutter of anticipation in my stomach. This meeting was a calculated risk, but I had weighed the potential outcomes carefully. At precisely 2 p.m., Vanessa Collins walked through the revolving doors. In person, she was even more striking than in photographs, tall and willowy, with the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads. She wore fitted black pants and a cream silk blouse, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. If she was surprised to see me waiting instead of James, she recovered quickly, her expression shifting from momentary confusion to polite curiosity. "Mrs. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I wasn't expecting you." I stood to shake her hand, noting her firm grip. "Ms. Collins, thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." "James said it was urgent," she replied, glancing around. "Is he joining us?" "No," I said simply. "This conversation is between you and me." A flicker of wariness crossed her features. "I see. Shall we get a drink?" We moved to the hotel bar, settling at a quiet corner table. Vanessa ordered a martini. I chose sparkling water. I watched her carefully as she arranged herself in her chair, noting the calculated grace of her movements. This was a woman accustomed to being observed, to using her physical presence as currency. "I'll be direct," I began. "I know about the book deal with Horizon Publishing. I know about the recordings you made of James discussing confidential company information, and I know about your meetings with Calvin Richards." Vanessa's expression didn't change, but I noticed her fingers tighten slightly around the stem of her martini glass. "You've been thorough." "Very," I agreed. "Which is why I also know about the wire fraud charges you faced in Colorado 3 years ago. The charges that were mysteriously dropped after the primary witness recanted his testimony." This time her composure slipped momentarily. "That's ancient history, and irrelevant." "Perhaps," I conceded. "Or perhaps it establishes a pattern of behavior that would be relevant to Horizon's legal department when assessing the risk of publishing your memoir." Vanessa took a deliberate sip of her martini, using the moment to collect herself. "What exactly do you want, Mrs. Carter?" "I want you to withdraw your book proposal," I said plainly. "And I want all recordings and documentation you collected during your relationship with James." She laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. "Why would I do that? That book is worth at least $250,000 to me. Probably more. After negotiations." I nodded, acknowledging her point. "The potential advance is substantial. But have you considered the potential legal costs? Corporate espionage carries significant penalties, both civil and criminal. The company would be obligated to pursue damages once they become aware of your activities." "I've been advised it's a gray area legally," she countered. "Whistleblower protections might apply." "They might," I agreed. "If you were an employee reporting legitimate wrongdoing through proper channels. But you weren't an employee. You were a third party deliberately extracting confidential information for personal gain. That's not whistleblowing, Ms. Collins. That's industrial espionage." Vanessa's confidence wavered visibly. "You're not a lawyer." "No," I confirmed. "But I've consulted with several in preparation for this conversation. Would you like their assessment of your legal position?" She didn't respond, instead taking another drink, her eyes never leaving mine. "Additionally, I continued. Horizon Publishing might reconsider their interest once they understand the full context. Publishers are understandably wary of projects that could implicate them in criminal activity." "This is about protecting James," she said accusingly. "After everything he did to you, you're still trying to save him." "No," I corrected her. "This is about protecting myself and innocent people at the company who would be collateral damage in your scheme. James will face consequences for his actions, regardless of what happens with your book." Vanessa studied me with newfound respect. You're not what I expected. No one ever expects the betrayed wife to be calculating rather than hysterical, I observed. It's an advantage I've learned to use. She smiled slightly, acknowledging the point. So, what are you offering? You can't expect me to walk away from this opportunity for nothing. I reached into my bag and withdrew a document, sliding it across the table. A non-disclosure agreement. In exchange for withdrawing your book proposal and surrendering all recordings and documents, you receive a one-time payment of $100,000. That's less than half what Horizon offered, she protested. But it comes without legal risk, I pointed out. And it's available immediately, not contingent on manuscript delivery, editing, or publication schedules. Vanessa picked up the document, scanning it quickly. This requires me to cease all contact with James. Yes, I confirmed. That's non-negotiable. She considered for a long moment, weighing her options. I waited patiently, confident in my assessment of her character. Vanessa was fundamentally pragmatic. She had targeted James not from any genuine attraction, but as a calculated means to financial gain. My offer provided a cleaner, safer path to her ultimate goal. Who's financing this payment? She asked finally. James doesn't have this kind of money available after your divorce settlement. I am, I said simply. Consider it an investment in my future peace of mind. Her eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. You're paying me to disappear from both your lives after I slept with your husband for 2 years? I'm paying for specific legal considerations, I corrected. How I feel about your relationship with James is irrelevant to this transaction. Vanessa laughed again, this time with something approaching genuine amusement. You're remarkable, Mrs. Carter. James never mentioned how formidable you are. James never really knew me, I replied calmly. Do we have an agreement? She tapped her red fingernail against the document, then nodded decisively. We do. But I'll need to have my lawyer review this first. Of course, I agreed. I wouldn't expect anything less. As I left the hotel 30 minutes later, having scheduled a formal signing for the following day, I felt an unexpected sense of resolution. The confrontation with Vanessa had been the final piece in the complex puzzle of my marriage's collapse. I had faced both my husband's betrayer and my own capacity for strategic calculation. For the first time in months, I found myself thinking, not about the past but about the future. A future I was now free to shape entirely on my own terms. 3 weeks after finalizing the agreement with Vanessa, I stood in the empty living room of my home, our home, for the last time. The furniture had been sold or donated, the walls stripped of photographs and artwork, the rooms echoing with the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. 10 years of memories contained in these walls, now reduced to bare spaces awaiting new occupants. The decision to sell the house had come suddenly, a moment of clarity while signing the non-disclosure agreement with Vanessa. I didn't want to rebuild my life in a space filled with reminders of betrayal. The generous divorce settlement provided financial freedom, and selling the house would give me a clean slate, geographically and emotionally. Are you sure about this? Eliza asked, standing in the doorway with the last small box of personal items. You love this house. I loved what I thought it represented, I corrected her, running my hand along the mantel where our wedding photo had once stood. A happy marriage, a secure future, shared dreams. It was never just about the house itself. Eliza nodded, understanding as she always did. So what's next? You still haven't told me where you're moving. I smiled, savoring the moment. Chicago, her eyes widened. Chicago? That's 700 miles away. Exactly, I said. New city, new opportunities, no shared history with James. And Harrington Partners offered me a senior position that would have taken 5 more years to achieve here. The job offer had been unexpected, a direct result of networking I'd done during the months of investigating James's affair. One of Maya's contacts had mentioned my background in financial analysis to a partner at Harrington, leading to a series of conversations and eventually a formal interview. They'd been impressed by my strategic thinking and attention to detail, skills I'd honed to a razor's edge during my ordeal. "When do you start?" Eliza asked, clearly still processing the news. 3 weeks, I replied. "Temporary housing is arranged until I find a place to buy." Eliza set down the box and embraced me tightly. "I'm going to miss you terribly, but I'm so proud of you, Rebecca. You've handled this nightmare with more grace and strength than anyone could have expected." I returned her hug, grateful beyond words for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it without you, any of it." "Yes, you could have," she countered, pulling back to look me in the eyes. "You're the strongest person I know. Always have been, even before James's betrayal forced you to recognize it." Perhaps she was right. The woman I had become during these painful months was someone I barely recognized sometimes. Resourceful, calculating, unafraid to pursue justice on her own terms. Yet this transformation hadn't made me harder or bitter, as I might have feared. Instead, I felt more authentically myself than ever before, stripped of illusions about my marriage and my own capabilities. We carried the last box to my car, where Eliza hugged me once more. "Call me when you get to the hotel tonight." "I will," I promised. "And you'll visit soon?" "Try and stop me," she grinned. "I expect a full tour of the Windy City." As Eliza drove away, I took one last look at the house. The pristine lawn, the flower beds I'd tended so carefully, the porch swing, where James and I had once planned our future together. I felt a momentary pang of sadness, not for the loss of my marriage, but for the woman I had been, trusting, devoted, building her life around someone else's dreams. The drive out of town took me past familiar landmarks, the restaurant where I'd learned of James's betrayal, the office building where he'd worked, the park where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. Each site evoked memories, but they felt increasingly distant, like scenes from someone else's life. At the city limits, I turned on the radio, letting music fill the car as the landscape gradually changed from suburbs to open highway. The settlement. Money from James was securely invested, the non-disclosure agreement with Vanessa executed and filed, the divorce finalized with terms that favored me significantly. All loose ends tied, all battles won. Yet victory felt different than I had imagined. There was no triumphant glow, no vindictive satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I had protected myself as best I could and was now free to move forward without looking back. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system, Maya's number. "Just checking that you got on the road okay," she said when I answered. "Just crossed the city limits," I confirmed. "Everything's set at my end. How about the final surveillance report?" "Completed and encrypted," Maya replied. "James has made no attempt to contact Vanessa since the agreement was signed. He's interviewing with smaller firms, but as expected, nothing at his previous level. Vanessa withdrew her book proposal from all publishers and has been seen meeting with modeling agencies again." "And the recordings?" I asked, still concerned about that particular loose end. "Confirmed destroyed per the agreement. Our tech specialist verified the deletion from her cloud storage and devices." I exhaled, relieved. "Thank you, Maya, for everything." "It's been an education working with you," she said, a smile evident in her voice. "Not many clients have your thoroughness." After ending the call, I drove in silence for a while, watching the miles accumulate on the dashboard. Each mile represented distance not just from the physical location of my old life, but from the emotional landscape I had inhabited for so long. Chicago represented more than just a new job and a new home. It was a deliberate choice to reclaim my narrative. In this new city, no one would know me as poor Rebecca, whose husband left her for a younger woman. I would be defined by my intelligence, my skills, my character, the essence of who I truly was beyond the role of wife. As the sun began to set ahead of me, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I smiled at the symbolism. One chapter. Ending, another beginning. And this time, I was the sole author of my story. Chicago welcomed me with its distinctive energy, a vibrant pulse that matched my determination to build something new. My temporary apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood offered stunning views of Lake Michigan, the vast blue expanse a constant reminder of the possibilities stretching before me. My first day at Harrington Partners set the tone for my new professional identity. The corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows signaled my senior status, while the challenging portfolio of clients demanded immediate focus and expertise. Rebecca. Carter? A tall man with salt and pepper hair appeared in my doorway, a friendly smile warming his features. Daniel Harrington, welcome to the firm. Thank you for the opportunity, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. I'm eager to get started. Your reputation precedes you, he said, settling into a chair across from my desk. Your analysis of the Westfield merger was impressively thorough. I smiled, remembering the case study I'd prepared for my interview, an analysis that had benefited significantly from the investigative skills I'd developed during James's affair. I believe in being comprehensive, I said simply. The transition proved smoother than I'd anticipated. Work provided structure and purpose, while the anonymity of the new city offered freedom. No one knew about my failed marriage, my husband's betrayal, or the calculated way I had reclaimed control. Here, I was defined solely by my present actions and abilities. Weekends became opportunities for exploration. Architectural tours along the river, exhibits at the Art Institute, performances at the Chicago Symphony. I was rediscovering interests, long subordinated to the rhythms of my marriage, reconnecting with passions that had once defined me before I became half of a couple. 1 month into my Chicago life, I found a brownstone in Lincoln Park that instantly felt like home. The hardwood floors, bay windows, and small garden offered character and charm without any echoes of my past life. I furnished it carefully, selecting each piece with intention, bold colors and clean lines rather than the traditional aesthetic James had preferred. This place is so you, Eliza declared during her first visit, spinning slowly in my living room to take it all in. I don't think there's a single thing James would have approved of. I laughed, realizing she was right. The vibrant artwork, the modern furniture, the layout optimized for a single professional. Everything reflected my preferences alone. You seem happy, she observed as we sipped wine on my small patio that evening, the city lights twinkling around. Us not just putting on a brave face happy, really happy. I considered her observation, searching for the truth in my own feelings. I think I am, I said finally. Not all the time. There are still moments of anger, days when the betrayal feels fresh again. But mostly, yes, I'm happy. You've built something beautiful out of something painful, she said, raising her glass in a small toast. That takes incredible strength. The truth was, reconstruction had become an act of self-discovery. Each decision, from the city I'd chosen to the coffee mug I used each morning, represented a reclamation of identity, separate from my role as James's wife. I was reconstructing not just my external life, but my understanding of myself. 8. Months into my new life in Chicago, I returned to my former city for a financial industry conference. The timing was intentional. I felt strong enough now to revisit the scene of my past life without being emotionally derailed. The conference was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown, just blocks from James's former office. As I checked into my room, I experienced a strange doubling of perspective, the familiar skyline viewed through entirely new eyes. I was a visitor now, not a resident. My emotional ties to this place had been methodically severed. After a successful presentation on investment strategies that earned enthusiastic questions from the audience, I was enjoying a glass of wine at the hotel bar when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Rebecca?" I turned to find James standing there, looking both surprised and uncertain. He had aged visibly in the month since our last encounter, new lines etched around his eyes, his posture less confident than I remembered. "James," I acknowledged calmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm representing Westlake Financial now," he explained, gesturing to his badge. "Much smaller firm, but they were willing to take a chance on me." I nodded, noticing he looked thinner, his once expensive suit slightly worn at the cuffs. The consequences of his choices were visibly mapped on his appearance. "May I join you?" he asked hesitantly, just for a moment. I considered refusing, then realized I felt no dread at the prospect of conversation. The man before me no longer held any power over my emotions. "Briefly," I agreed. "I have dinner plans soon." He sat, ordering a scotch before turning to face me fully. "You look amazing," he said, his tone free of flirtation, simply stating a fact. "Chicago must agree with you." "It does," I confirmed. "Senior partnership at Harrington, new home, fresh start." "I heard about the Harrington position," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "That's impressive, Rebecca. They're lucky to have you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history creating an invisible barrier between us. "How are things with you?" I asked finally, more from politeness than genuine interest. James sighed, taking a sip of his scotch. "Rebuilding. Slowly." The ethics violation made finding another position challenging. Westlake was the best option available. I nodded, unsurprised. "And Vanessa?" A flicker of pain crossed his features. "Gone. After your agreement with her, she moved to Los Angeles, pursuing modeling, I believe, though I haven't kept track." "I see." "You knew that would happen, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "When you offered her the money, you knew she'd leave once there was no book deal, no corporate information to extract." "I suspected," I admitted. Vanessa struck me as remarkably pragmatic about her relationships. James let out a short, mirthless laugh. "That's one way to put it." He studied me for a moment. "You know, for months I was angry with you. I blamed you for how thoroughly my life fell apart. But eventually, I realized something." "What's that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You weren't vindictive," he said thoughtfully. "You were strategic. There's a difference. You could have destroyed me completely if you'd wanted to, made everything public, pursued criminal charges for the misappropriated funds. But you were precise, surgical. You ensured consequences proportional to my actions." I considered his assessment, finding it surprisingly accurate. I wasn't interested in destruction for its own sake, just in justice. "Well," he said, raising his glass slightly, "justice was served, quite thoroughly." As I prepared to leave, James spoke again, his voice quieter. "For what it's worth, I am genuinely sorry, Rebecca. Not just for getting caught, but for betraying you in the first place. You deserved better." I looked at him directly, searching his face for the truth behind his words. For the first time since discovering his affair, I believed him. Not that it changed anything. The damage was done, our paths permanently diverged. But I recognized the sincerity in his regret. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "Goodbye, James." Walking away, I felt a curious lightness. The encounter had provided something I hadn't realized I needed. Confirmation that I had emerged from our marriage's destruction not just intact, but stronger, while James was still struggling to rebuild what he had so carelessly destroyed. 1. Year to the day after that fateful anniversary dinner, I stood on the balcony of my Chicago brownstone, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and crimson. The symbolism of the date wasn't lost on me. A full circle completed, a new cycle beginning. The phone call with Eliza earlier that day had been filled with laughter and updates, her life continuing on its familiar trajectory while mine had transformed completely. She'd asked if the anniversary brought up difficult feelings, but surprisingly it didn't. The date had lost its power to wound me. "I have news," I'd told her toward the end of our call. "I've started seeing someone." Her delighted exclamation had made me smile. "Tell me everything. Who is he? How did you meet?" "His name is Michael. He's an architect I met through a client. It's early days still, but promising." What I didn't fully articulate to Eliza was how different this relationship felt from anything I'd experienced before. Michael and I had connected over shared interests and values, not the magnetic attraction and ambitious compatibility that had characterized my early relationship with James. Our connection had developed slowly, thoughtfully, each step forward, a conscious choice rather than an emotional impulse. Most importantly, I'd entered this relationship with clear eyes and firm boundaries. The woman who had once molded herself to fit James's expectations now stood confidently in her own identity, unwilling to compromise her hard-won autonomy. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Michael stood on my doorstep, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small wrapped package in the other. "I know we said no gifts," he said with a slightly sheepish smile, but I couldn't resist when I saw this. Inside the package was a small, exquisitely crafted glass sculpture, a phoenix, rising from stylized flames, its wings outstretched toward the sky. "The artist called it rebirth," Michael explained. "It reminded me of you." I traced the delicate glass form, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture and the insight it represented. Michael knew fragments of my story, not every calculated detail, but enough to understand the journey I'd undertaken. Over dinner, our conversation flowed easily, touching on his latest architectural project, my upcoming business trip to New York, books we'd recently read. There was an ease between us that I treasured, a mutual respect that formed the foundation of our growing connection. "Are you happy?" Michael asked later as we sat on the balcony. The city lights spread before us like a constellation of earthbound stars. The question was simple, yet profound, requiring a moment of honest reflection. Happiness had once seemed a straightforward concept to me: a good marriage, professional success, the life I had carefully planned. Now I understood it differently, as something more resilient and self-contained, less dependent on external circumstances, and more on internal alignment. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "Not because everything is perfect or because the past didn't happen. I'm happy because I've integrated those experiences into who I am now. Nothing was wasted, not even the pain." Michael nodded, understanding the depth behind my words. That's true wisdom, isn't it? Not avoiding difficult experiences, but learning to carry them differently. As the evening ended and Michael left with a gentle kiss and plans to meet again in a few days, I returned to the balcony alone, the glass phoenix catching the light from my living room. The woman who had sat across from James that anniversary, night, devastated yet determined, would hardly recognize the person I had become. Not because I had erased her or denied her pain, but because I had transformed it into something valuable: discernment, strength, and a profound appreciation for my own resilience. The betrayal that had once threatened to define me had instead become merely one chapter in a much longer, richer story that continued to unfold. A story I was now writing entirely on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.